Hello, gunfighters, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting and gun-related stuff the right way with God at the center. So I think I'm going to forego the lengthy bio. Try to abbreviate it. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also, law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Professional big game hunter and guide. If you feel called to support, check out Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. With that, I am your host, Michael Milito, and I am blessed to serve you today. So, when to not choose 9mm? Some people might think 9mm is the best round, period. I would disagree with that. I would say the 9mm is the best all-around defensive handgun round. I came to this conclusion on my own long ago before it was the consensus. Back when everybody thought you needed a 40 or a 45 when I was in law enforcement. I've gone over that story before. I probably won't rehash it here. And I think it is the best, most well-balanced centerfire defensive handgun cartridge, period. But it's not, I would concede, always the best. It's not the best for everything. It's not. There are several circumstances, situations, philosophies in which I would argue, and I will argue with you here, be circumspect men and reason with me, that it's not the best choice. The first and most obvious one is it's not what you have, and you don't have the resources to dedicate to a whole new platform. Like you know somebody that's stuck in the 90s rocking a fanny pack and a rat tail, much like I did back in the 90s. But they still have this thing that 40 is the best round ever, and you listen to them and you bought a 40. And that's what you have for now. I would submit you're better off keeping that and buying ammo for it and training with that than trying to get something else and not having the time or money in which to shoot it. So that'd be the first one. You just have something else and you cannot afford something different. That would be a pretty obvious answer. But that's kind of a cop-out. That's not really what I'm talking about. Let's talk about like some legitimate uses where you would want something other than the 9mm. A big one, revolvers. Revolvers have a lot of advantages. They have a lot of advantages in CQB. They have a lot of advantages just close quarters wise. They have advantages in that they don't need a certain amount of power, either positive or negative, to cycle the action. Meaning you do it with your body mechanics. You pulling the trigger puts a new round in the chamber, lines it up, so that you can shoot really mild rounds and really hot rounds. And that might appeal to you. If it's your one handgun, you may decide, and I would submit 357 Magnum would be a great choice for that. It is sufficient for hunting medium game. Yes, I speak from personal experience. The 357 38 Special platform is plenty for that. Marksmanship being paramount and shot placement, as with all things, but especially on a marginal size round. But good bullet construction, good shot placement, 357 Magnum on medium and even large game will get it done. It's great for that. It's also, nobody would argue, a poor defensive round. It's a great defensive round. Also, you can shoot 38 specials. Yes, there are revolvers chambered in 9mm, but you get into all kinds of worlds where you have to use moon clips or the chambers are cut and maybe it's not the best at extraction. Right? I would argue if you're going with a dedicated revolver, you may as well go with a dedicated revolver round. And if you're looking for a good crossover, I think there's a real good case to be made for the 357 38 Special. You can shoot really mild 38 Specials for training, for accuracy, for maybe taking smaller game. And you can load it up for really good hot defensive rounds, for hunting rounds. That's a good reason why you might want a caliber other than 9mm. They do make bird shot rounds, snake shot rounds for the 9mm, reliably cycle those. So if you wanted, you're going hiking in, southwest Texas, and rattlesnakes are a big concern, or the deserts of Nevada, where people are still a concern and a threat, but also rattlesnakes are not a trivial thing. I have had some close encounters with rattlesnakes, and pretty, let's say, puckering encounters with rattlesnakes out west. That's a real thing. And you can pretty seamlessly, if you train with it, go and have a cylinder loaded with 1, maybe 2 snake shot, bird shot, whatever you want to call it, small game loads, and also have cylinders with full power 357s or 38 specials, or have the extra ammo on you. So there's a good case right there for something other than 9mm. Let's talk about another one. We think of these as handgun rounds. What about carbines? We mentioned a 38 special 357, also great in a carbine. But if we're talking about loads or rounds in the semi-automatic guys, I just went over the 40 Smith & Wesson. I'm not a big fan of it in handguns almost any of the time, but look at the ballistics on 40 Smith & Wesson in a carbine. Look at that compared to 10mm out of a handgun. Now 10mm is getting into that realm like the 357, where it's a great all-around round. It's a great all-around choice cartridge for defense against things maybe larger than humans, or for hunting. And when you put a 40 Smith & Wesson in a carbine, look at the ballistics on that versus the ballistics on 10mm out of a handgun, and you might be pleasantly surprised. So maybe you want a PCC and you want a good do-it-all round. That would be a case for something other than 9mm. You do gain some velocity putting 9mm in a carbine for sure, but you step up quite a bit in power when you move up to 40 Smith & Wesson in a pistol caliber carbine. And unlike the handgun, you have a lot more mass in dealing with that carbine. So recoil, while I would argue it's not worth the trade-off almost ever in a handgun, it might be negligible difference in a carbine because you're dealing with such a bigger platform and more points of contact. So that is another arena where you may look at something other than 9mm. Moving on to another one, we touched on 10mm. Let's go back there. I think if you're going to step up and you want something bigger and you want to stick with a semi-auto for bear defense, for something like that, I really think that stepping up to the 10mm is the way to go, as opposed to stepping up to the 40 Smith & Wesson, unless you hand load. If you hand load, you can. There are some powders, long shot, I'll mention. If you're a reloader, I used to have a go-to load I would load for hunting for the 40 Smith & Wesson with long shot. That was very impressive. But aside from that, if you're talking factory ammo and you want to step up to a good defensive cartridge for things other than humans, or not just natural beasts, but mechanical beasts, you want a good vehicle gun to penetrate car doors, stop vehicle rammings. A full-size fighting handgun like that, you want to make that your carry. Stepping up to the 10mm really has some big advantages. It is not a trivial amount of additional energy, mass, and velocity. It is quite a big step up. So if you're looking at, you want more power, right? You want to supercharge that carry gun. You want it for bear defense or hunting of bear, or you want it for protection from sheet metal beasts, vehicles, vehicle rammings, things like that are a real thing. Road rage incidents, whether your fault or not, that turn into gun incidents. I've had one of those. Those can be they can escalate quickly. So having something that you might have to shoot through your car, that's a real thing. Like, that's part of training. We would get shooting windshields and things like that. Shooting through car doors in different tactical applications that I've been a part of. That's a real thing that happens in the real world. So being able to shoot through your car, somebody trying to kill you on the other side of your car, or shooting into somebody else's car that's trying to kill you, that's a real tactical application. So for something like that, stepping up to 10 millimeter, I'd say that is a real viable option. So you may want to look at that, stepping up to the 10 millimeter. That's a good case for why you might want something other than 9 millimeter. Let's talk about, we talked mostly so far, I guess not with the birdshot and things, but mostly about stepping up in power. What about when you want to step down? You step down in gun platforms, and for any given amount of power, you get more recoil. This is a reality, pretty much. You can't cheat physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. When you fire a firearm, that recoil is going to go into a couple of places. It's going to get absorbed into the gun, the workings of the gun, the mass of the gun, and into your hands and your body. The less gun there is to absorb that recoil, the more is going into you. And especially if we're talking about like carry guns, you get to a point of diminishing returns. And there may be a time when you want a smaller and smaller gun because of non-permissive environment, deep concealed carry, whatever the case may be. You may get to that tipping point. And that tipping point for me is if when I shoot that weapon, I have to readjust my grip every time I fire it, I greatly reduce my rate of fire. And you can argue the 9mm is better ballistics than a smaller caliber, but if I have to adjust my grip every time I fire it, to me I've reached a point of diminishing return, in which case I might want to take a step back in calibers. I might want to step down to the 380 if it's a very similar size platform, because it's maybe going to allow me to get fast, accurate hits on target consecutively. And to me, that's more important than the small step down in power. That being said, I don't own any 380s, but I could see where that would be a viable option. Even stepping down even further to a super subcompact, you may get to the point where those 380s are pretty snappy. You might want to step down to a 22. Am I telling you that 22 is the best caliber for self-defense? No. I am telling you it can kill people, and it can kill a lot of other things too. So if your choice is a gun that you can get fast, accurate hits on target with that's small and subcompact, whether that be 22 long rifle, 22 Magnum, or a 380 that's snappy and you flinch when you shoot it and you have to readjust your grip no matter how crushing of a grip you put on it every time you shoot, you might look at a caliber other than 9mm. You might step down to 380, 32 auto. I don't really see much of a benefit to 25 auto unless you just make the argument that it's more reliable than a rimfire, because I think 22 is probably better in a lot of respects. But that said, there may come a point where you decide 9mm for the platform that I'm shooting is not worth the trade-off. So that's a real viable option. I would rather have somebody with, what's that really cool new carry gun, the Ruger LCP and 22 long rifle that came out. They're a handy little gun. And a gun that small, I can see a real case for choosing that. In fact, if you offered me one or the other, I would certainly take that in 22 long rifle over 380. Ruger LCPs and 380s, they're very snappy, and having to adjust your grip every time is kind of annoying. Being able to get quick hits on target consecutively with that 22 long rifle, I think the trade-off is worth it there. And a gun like that I could see, or if you want to carry a gun like that, I could see a real viable option. Do they make guns that small or very similar in 9mm? Yes. But again, are you able to shoot them without having to adjust your grip? Or what's your shot recovery time? And if you don't know, get a split timer. If you're spending money on guns and getting new guns and this thing and that thing, get a shot timer. I'm not talking about the free app on your phone. Those are marginal at best. And then you drop your phone in training and you break your phone, you're probably out and worse off than if you had just spent a little bit of money on a legit shot timer. But know what your recovery times are. Would you rather have, 0.3 splits with a 22 or almost a second splits because you have to adjust your grip every time you shoot that subcompact 9mm? There's more to guns than just what's just on paper. It's 9mm and it holds 12 rounds and it's super subcompact. Yeah, but if you can't shoot it well, the other stuff is less important. So there's a real solid case for something other than 9mm. For a training handgun, I'll give you a real world example for myself. I often train in a similar platform in training with a 22 to my centerfire handgun. When I decided I wanted to, instead of just writing optics off, because for years, I'll admit I was wrong. I wrote optics off, and I think in the beginning I was probably right. I don't think they were rugged and robust enough to be considered for a defensive carry gun, but they got into that realm long before I accepted them. I was kind of a troglodyte in that arena, but I thought, instead of me just writing these off, I'm actually going to run them. And for me running them for a while, I decided first to run them on a 22 to see if it was something I wanted to dedicate to. And I did that. And I got one that was a good training analogy to like a 22 with similar ergos to a 1911, which was my go-to carry gun at the time, or one of my go-to carry guns at the time. And I was familiar with the platform, so if I'm going to try running, I could try very easily doing a lot of training with the 22 with and without a red dot. And I did that, and long story short, I decided, yes, optics, there is a real advantage there, enough that I would consider switching to them, and I have. But putting all those rounds through it, I could have spent thousands of dollars doing that with centerfire 9mm. But I could also, if I'm trying to get the feel and the draw and everything down with a 22, I can save a lot of money doing that if I'm trying to get used to a red dot. So that's a real good case for something other than 9mm. Now, I still want to train with my carry gun, with my centerfire 9mm defensive gun, but again, if I'm just practicing the draw and picking up the dot, I can do a lot of that and save a lot of money with 22 long rifle. Also, if, let's say, you live in an area where you can't legally conceal carry, like the odds of you getting a concealed carry permit are like the odds of you finding a $100 bill next time you walk into Walmart just laying in the parking lot. You probably should turn it in anyway and see if anybody has lost it. But you get what I'm saying. The odds on that are not very high. There are certain places where you might live, Los Angeles County or New Jersey or Massachusetts, where you're just probably not going to get. I'm still saying you probably should try, but the likelihood of you being able to get a concealed carry weapon is negligible. So for your home defense gun, I would argue there's a lot better choices than a handgun. And people might disagree with that, but if somebody's breaking into my house and you give me a choice of a bunch of different weapons, any handgun that I own is going to be very, very low on that list. So you can't have it on you, right? You can't have it loaded in a vehicle in a lot of these places. So a shotgun's a better choice in almost all those arenas. But you want to be familiar with a handgun, be safe with a handgun, be well acquainted with handgun use. There's a good argument to be made there for a 22 revolver, a 22, Ruger Mark IV, and whatever guise you want it in. Because you still want to own a handgun, you still want to be familiar with how they work, and shooting a handgun is quite a bit different than shooting a long gun. You still want to have familiarity with it, but you can't carry it for defense. You're not going to be able to use it for defense. If somebody's coming into your house, or if you have to go for a truck gun, you might as well go for a shotgun. So there's a real argument there to be made for something other than 9mm. Alright, a few more. When not to choose 9mm. Power to weight ratio. I would argue 9mm is a great power to weight ratio round. However, let's say you're hiking the Arizona Trail. If you don't know, the Arizona Trail is basically a really long trail that goes from the bottom to the top of Arizona. It's really long. A lot of open country there. Also, there's, quite a bit of border activity, let's just call it that. I don't know how else to put that. You know what I'm talking about. Border activity down there. You decided you want to hike the Arizona Trail. Your object is to cover as much ground as possible. You want a super lightweight option. You want to be able to carry ammo with you because, if you're used to being east of the Mississippi, you may never be more than 50 miles from a store. But if you're in the deserts of Arizona, you could be hundreds of miles from anything. So the ammo you have is going to be the ammo you have, right? And if you're doing long through hikes, that is what it is. And you want firepower, and there's open country, and you want to be able to carry a substantial amount of ammo without it weighing you down. If you've never done really long hiking operations with a pack, ounces add up. Ounces equal pounds, pounds equal pain. It's a pretty common saying. For this application, you could make a real solid choice for 5.7. And I think I'm going to do a whole other episode, God willing, on 5.7 philosophy. Just philosophizing. being circumspect and considering the usefulness of 5.7. But here, in this, where you're doing a long through hike in open country, coyotes are a thing, jaguars are even a thing in Arizona if you didn't know, and people behaving badly are often your biggest threat. And you want to have a gun, you want to have it for defense, you want to carry a substantial amount of ammo, but you don't want it to weigh a lot. You get a lot more benefit power to weight ratio going to 5.7 over 9mm. You got, let's just go with the classic FN 5.7 pistol. It holds 21 rounds of 5.7 ammo. It weighs very little. It's a full-size fighting handgun. It's a military handgun. It doesn't weigh a lot. It's got a pretty flat trajectory. You can hold a lot of ammo, and it doesn't weigh a lot. And you could throw an extra 50, 100 rounds in your pack, and it's going to weigh something. But it's not going to weigh anywhere near as much as 2 boxes of 9mm. If you're talking about carrying your food, your tent, your sleep system, your water filter, your extra pair of footwear and socks, and whatever else you're going to have, all the other things, there's only so much allotted, and those ounces can add up. So for a scenario like this, or for long distance mountain biking, things like that, where you want to carry a substantial amount of ammo that's reasonably good for defense, and you don't want to carry a lot of extra weight, I can see a real good solid case for choosing something in 5.7 over 9mm. Also, I'll throw out this, let's go full apocalyptic here. Let's go full end of the world as we know it. The peanut butter and chocolate has hit the fan. A lot of people's go, not mine, but to be fair, but a lot of people's go-to apocalyptic choice is the 22 long rifle. They'll say that it's the best for carrying vast amounts of ammo, and you can kill an elephant with it, and it's so good at all these different things. And I love 22. I love shooting 22. I love training with 22. I love hunting with 22. It wouldn't be my first choice. However, a lot of people would have it as their first choice. And I'm not really comparing, I mentioned like the PCCs, but I'm not comparing like 9mm to 30-06. You get to a point of ridiculousness in that. But a lot of people would choose the 22, like Ruger 1022 takedown would be a choice for this, like the Henry AR-7 survival rifle. You could carry, if you had to just head out in the bush, in the woods, the wilderness, and you may never come back. You're carrying all the ammo you can. You could easily carry 1,000 rounds of 22. It's hard to carry 1,000 rounds of a lot of other ammo with all the other stuff you might have to carry. And that's why they'll tout the 22 as the best choice. Well, if you're carrying a 22 long rifle, in 22 long rifle, like a long gun, a Ruger 1022, an AR-7, pick your flavor, Marlin 60, it makes sense then to commonality of ammo have a revolver or a semi-automatic in 22 long rifle as well. A Ruger Mark IV, a Smith & Wesson, I think is 617 is their 22 long rifle designation revolver. I could see a real solid choice there as to why you might choose something other than 9mm. You're already carrying 22. You already have a long gun in 22. That's your go-to ammo. Stick with it for your sidearm. I can see a real solid case for that. Likewise, going back to the 357, we talked about that. Somebody may choose 357 for a lot of the reasons we stated that we aforementioned in the beginning of the podcast. They may decide they want a PCC, old school lever action, and 357 Magnum. Wouldn't be a bad choice. And they just want commonality of ammo. So they're going to have their revolver, GP 100, Colt Python, whatever, in the same ammo. So they just have to worry about ammo that'll work in both guns. That's it. Simplicity of supply chain logistics. That's a real solid case for something other than 9mm. And let's go to another one. 45 ACP. I like 45. I like 1911s. I got nothing against them. I would argue that 9mm makes a lot of sense, and there's nothing heretical about a 1911 platform and 22 long rifle. My go-to duty gun for a long time when I got the, let's say, the ability, the mastery of handguns to take advantage of it, The STI, now Staccato, 2011s. I'm blessed to own 2 of them. They were my go-to, both competition gun and my go-to duty gun. I trusted other people's lives, the lives of the men on the team, and my own life to those platforms. There's nothing wrong with them in 9mm. But I could see a real solid case for why somebody, if they just were married to the 1911 platform, to go with 45 ACP. It is the caliber that gun was designed for. It works fine in 9mm, but you have a lot of free space in there. That magazine, the magazine well, all those things were designed for a cartridge the length of 45 ACP. So with that cartridge, with all those years being designed for 45 ACP, I could see a real legit argument for keeping it in 45 ACP. If you love the 1911, you love the trigger, you compete with the 1911, you're going to carry one for defense. Really, there's a really good solid case to be made because all the engineering, all the development for all those years up until recently where they became popular in 9mm has gone into that gun in a 45. And if you're carrying a gun that big anyway, that was, and let's say it's a single stack, yeah, there's a big advantage to carrying, a double stack STI with 26 rounds in capacity. But if you're talking 10 rounds of 9mm versus 8 rounds of 45, which would be common in a single stack 1911, I'd argue that difference is negligible. Why not go with the round that gun was designed for? 45 ACP. 9mm is a great defensive round, but that doesn't make 45 ACP a bad round. Especially if you, for some reason, you wanted more power, or you just wanted more penetration, or you were stuck using ball ammo for whatever reason. And mostly because that gun was designed for that round, and it just makes a lot of sense to have that gun, if that's your go-to gun, in the 45 ACP. So those are some reasons. Now let me put a bow on this. Let me wrap this up by saying I came up with a lot of scenarios why to choose something other than 9mm, and you may be able to think of more. That said, I still think that the 9mm, for the vast majority of circumstances, situations, and people, is the best go-to choice for a defensive handgun caliber. Period. Not always the best, but in generalities, in general, it's a better choice. It's the best choice. It makes the most sense for the broadest spectrum of circumstances and people. 9mm is an awesome round. So that's pretty much it on that. I'll wrap this up, God willing, with some tactical tip and verse of the day. Whatever your defensive handgun caliber of choice is, except for maybe 22, probably just throw these rounds away instead of doing what I'm going to tell you to do. But round setback is a thing. Round setback, if you don't know, if you chamber a round over and over, you can literally push that bullet back in the case. There is some problems with this, maybe to do with reliability and feeding, but mostly to do with pressure. The pressure that the 9mm is designed to operate with is for a certain seating depth of that bullet. If you push that bullet back, you can greatly increase the pressure. You can increase it to a point of danger. So something that I will do is when I chamber my go-to round in my defensive handgun and I go and take it out. So we should all be dry firing, right? Did you dry fire today? Hopefully you did. When you go to dry fire and you take that round out, I will generally put a mark on it with a Sharpie back where the primer is. Once I've done that a couple of times, I will generally cycle that out of the top of the magazine and put it into the bottom of my backup magazine. For my EDC, I generally carry a full-size fighting handgun, and I'll carry a backup magazine. I'll put those rounds in the bottom of the backup magazine once I think that they're on that marginal side. I can't see any round setback. If I see round setback, I'll just throw that round out. But I'll cycle through those, and usually by the time you've gone through that, it's probably time to replace your carry ammo every year, every 6 months, depending on your climate anyway. But don't just keep, if you dry fire every day, and I really hope that you do, really pay attention to chambering that same round over and over and over again, day after day after day, week after week after week. Round setback is a real thing. It can really happen. So just keep an eye out for it, and that's what I do. So that's my tactical tip. you take that round out of your chamber, mark it with a Sharpie. I'm not telling you have to do it every time, but maybe every 2 or 3 times you've chambered that round, cycle that to the bottom of your spare magazine so that it's you still have it as defensive ammo, because defensive ammo is not cheap, but it still doesn't have any round setback, and you start on a fresh round. That's a practice that I would hearken you to at least consider and look at. Hopefully you enjoyed that episode, hearkening back to some of the older episodes, a mobile episode that was recorded. This is not. This is in the studio. This portion, I didn't want to miss out on a tactical verse of the day. You, therefore, must endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. Now, as somebody who has been a soldier, one thing I can tell you is a soldier, especially a grunt, they're acquainted with hardship. I don't think anybody becomes a Marine or a soldier in the Army because they're looking for easy. Hopefully because they're looking for good. Likewise you. Jesus says, narrow is the gate and difficult is the way. It's not because it's easy, because it's right. Because it's the right thing. And the right things are often difficult to do. It doesn't make them not worth it. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.